The British regular army fought in perfectly aligned rows, operating as a massive, well-oiled military machine of empire. Against them stood an improvised colonial force, firing from the cover of woods and thick smoke. Before the musket fire, the 13 colonies were locked in an economic system called mercantilism. Mercantilism is a policy where a mother country extracts raw materials from its colonies to build its own wealth. After the costly French and Indian War, Britain needed cash, and Parliament looked across the Atlantic to get it. Parliament began levying direct taxes. The 1765 Stamp Act taxed paper. Then they taxed glass and tea. Crucially, the colonists had no elected representatives in the British Parliament to vote on these measures. English law, dating back to the Magna Carta, guaranteed that free-born subjects could not be taxed without their consent. Taking their money without offering a voice in government meant stripping the colonists of their basic legal rights. The political debate ended on the night of December 16, 1773. Colonists, organized as the Sons of Liberty, boarded East India Company ships in Boston and dumped 342 chests of tea directly into the harbor water. Local merchant and eyewitness John Andrews called it an ocular demonstration of the colonists' anger. He watched from Griffin's Wharf as they destroyed the equivalent of millions of dollars worth of British property in a single night. King George III retaliated swiftly. In response to the destroyed tea and the growing unrest, he issued the Proclamation of Rebellion. This royal decree officially declared the colonies to be in a state of open uprising, making anyone who aided them guilty of treason. The Crown deployed 10,000 regular army troops to North America. Boston's localized act of property damage had forced London to respond with military occupation, locking both sides onto a path toward open warfare. The reality of fighting the British Army was brutal. Early skirmishes left disorganized groups of colonial militiamen retreating through the mud, entirely lacking gunpowder, winter clothing, and basic rations. By the summer of 1776, the British assembled the largest naval fleet in their history off the coast of New York. The map shows tens of thousands of British troops, alongside hired German soldiers known as Hessians, cornering Patriot forces around Long Island. At the Battle of Long Island, American forces suffered heavy casualties. To avoid total capture, the surviving troops slipped away in the fog, beginning a grueling multi-year strategy of constant retreat and evasion. Grassroots anger could start a rebellion, but it could not maintain a war. Without a centralized command structure and professional discipline, the colonial militias were on the verge of collapsing. To stabilize the dying cause, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington as commander-in-chief. Congress chose the Virginia planter because of his reputation for absolute integrity, trusting him to unite the fractured regional militias under one banner. The true test of his leadership came during the freezing winter of 1777 at Valley Forge. Washington rode through the snow-covered encampment, watching his men starve and freeze, constantly lobbying a reluctant Congress for critical supplies. Rather than wait for the spring thaw, Washington brought in Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer. Von Steuben implemented a rigorous daily training program to teach the shivering troops European battle tactics and precise bayonet drills. When the army marched out of Valley Forge, they moved in unison. They had transformed into a disciplined, professional military force, capable of standing in open combat against British regulars. Washington's success rested on his ability to balance strict discipline with the empathy required to maintain troop morale against impossible odds. The turning point arrived at Yorktown in 1781. American and French infantry marched south from New York, while a French naval fleet blocked the Chesapeake Bay, completely surrounding British General Charles Cornwallis and forcing a 3-week siege. According to American surgeon Dr. James Thatcher, the British surrender was filled with bitter chagrin. He recorded that many defeated soldiers manifested a sullen temper, throwing their muskets onto the pile with violence to render them useless. As the defeated troops marched past, they turned their heads toward the French lines to avoid making eye contact with the Americans. Seeing this, the Marquis de Lafayette ordered his band to play Yankee Doodle, a tune originally used to mock the colonists, forcing the British to acknowledge the ragtag army that had beaten them. The final humiliation came during the sword surrender. Cornwallis claimed illness and sent his second-in-command, Brigadier General Charles O'Hara. O'Hara tried to hand his sword to the French commander, Rochambeau. Rochambeau refused and pointed to Washington. Washington also refused, directing the sword to his own second-in-command, Major General Benjamin Lincoln. Forcing the British to hand the sword to an American officer was a calculated diplomatic move. It established the young American nation as an equal and legitimate power on the world stage. The musket fire eventually stopped, and the Treaty of Paris formally ended the war. But the physical victory only mattered because of the ideas driving it. This is the 1776 Declaration of Independence. It laid out precise grievances against the king, but also codified two radical concepts. All people possess unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments only exist through the consent of the governed. Those ideals provided the blueprint for a functioning republic. Over 2 centuries, the 13 stars of the early colonial flags multiplied into a 50-star configuration, absorbing new states under a single constitutional framework. The Continental Army survived starvation, harsh winters, and the greatest naval armada of its time. These military sacrifices established a system of self-governance, creating the foundational architecture that defines the United States 2.5 centuries later.